right. It's my pleasure to introduce Tom Tamura. Tom was born right after World War II and graduated from a local high school. He went to Tokyo Dental College and has been practicing dentistry for 11 years after graduating. I think that's a typo there. It's probably longer. But in 1975, he married his wife from Minnesota. I think it was Monday. They celebrated their 48th anniversary, unless it was yesterday. Congratulations, Tom. They have 3 girls and a boy. All of them are married, and he has 13 grandchildren. Tom worked for 38 years as an owner and technician for a dental lab business. He joined City of Lakes Rotary in 1989 and has been serving in the Rotary Youth Exchange program since 1987. Please welcome Tom Tamura.
Thank you, Ross. I'm my best. It's my pleasure to introduce Street Voices of Change. Street Voices of Change is a group of people with lived experience of homelessness who come together to work for change in their community. They started meeting in 2006, and their organization work has included the creation and the implementation of the Shelter Residence Bill of Rights in Hennepin County, free downtown community storage, increasing access to housing, case management, and more. The group holds a twice-weekly meeting in Minneapolis, which are led by Street Voices members. Street Voices of Change ensure that the voice of those impacted most are heard in the work to prevent and end homelessness. Please welcome Mr. Cecil Scott and Miss Katie Dillon, and also the Miss Tyra Thomas.
Good morning. Thank you for welcoming us this morning. And thank you for that fine introduction, Tom. Thank you. I'm still waking up. I went to the Janet Jackson concert last night. Yeah, one eye. So, don't think, I guess what I'd like to say is just talk more about our accomplishments since we've been together. As Tom mentioned, since 2016, we came together over concerns around shelter, and one shelter in particular, were a lot of complaints. And we found that folks were not being treated with dignity and respect in those places. And we had to pay to stay in those shelters. So I'm paying someone to disrespect me, sexually harass me, kick me out in the middle of the night if you don't like something I complained about, paying for food that was substandard, all bad. And also the state was paying them while we had to pay. You used to have to pay 90% of your income to stay in, say, like the Salvation Army. So if someone made work or received any benefits like Social Security, say you got $600, they would only let you keep $100 per month. And it was actually fueling homelessness. And folks weren't able to get into housing because they were taking all your money. You don't have money to go pay for an application. You don't have money to go travel to go see it, a place if you were looking. It was very cumbersome and shameful, if you ask me. I want to make this point about, I always found it interesting how, and I think I might have been guilty of it, walking by folks with a sign, you know, please help. There's a little tin can. But when people are outside ringing that bell for the kettle, a lot of those folks that used to ring those bells were homeless people raising money for a shelter that they couldn't get out of. So we got together as a group to think about ideas on how we can make a difference and change that environment. And we ended up coming up with, as Tom mentioned, the Shelter Residence Bill of Rights. Myself and another colleague served on a task force. Legislature charged us with having the conversation around task force on what shelter should look like. And we came up with a report. We met the deadline December 15th. And the idea is to set standards on how folks are being treated, and then also oversight, like an ombudsman. Because when we complain, the complaints go off deaf ears. Nobody would hear us. So that's being talked about. That was the task force of lived experience. That was the other thing. Folks were having conversation for decades about ending homelessness, but I wasn't at the table who had the lived experience. Can't tell me how you're gonna fix it and you haven't lived it. It's just that simple. So the group grew and grew and grew. We had 4 locations before COVID. Now we're down to 2 because we lost 2. Our fiscal agent is Central Lutheran. And we have supporters called Align, which you probably formerly known as Downtown Congregations in Homelessness. That is 17 churches and roughly 20,000 members who support Street Voices of Change. In 2022, we celebrated our 6th-year anniversary, and we have parties to celebrate. We usually do it in Loring Park. We advocate, again, at the state legislature for important changes to the housing support program. Housing support program used to be called GRH. GRH covers group homes, group living situations, halfway houses. It's a state-run housing program, and it was the worst in the business. House State of Minnesota said they want to end homelessness, and they have their own state program that was horrible. Same thing. If I'm in a housing program under housing support, currently as it is, say I get $700, I got to give them all that money except for $120 for 30 days currently. So I was in that program 7 years ago, formerly homeless. I was on and off homeless for 20 years, and that with or without children. And that program was horrific. So after 7 years of working to change that and have at the Capitol, we're just so elated at Street Voices of that accomplishment. Street Voices of Change Speaker Bureau members participated in 7 engagements throughout the year last year to tell their stories and share about the work of Street Voices. The work totaled over 16 hours of preparation and speaking by 15 speakers. Would you like to read 2 of these? This is my colleague.
Well, pardon me. I didn't actually plan to read these statements. I actually plan to give you all my own testimony of what I've experienced in homelessness. I went through a very difficult relationship maybe 8 or 9 years ago. It was very, very rough, and I ended up choosing to be homeless, and I didn't know how to be homeless. I went out into the streets of Minneapolis and sleeping in the parks and on buses and trains and different things. and went through a lot of stuff out there. And I had a temporary job, maybe paying me $9 an hour. And I was going to eat breakfast at a place called the Opportunity Center, ran by Catholic Charities. And maybe 30 feet away from me, I witnessed a man be shot in the back of his head and killed in front of me. And it was the first sign to me that if I didn't get out of the streets, I was going to die in the streets. And a few months later, I ended up being robbed, most likely stunned with a stun gun, and fell into a retaining wall and split my face completely down the center, and was laying on the concrete, bleeding, and people were basically walking past me and stepping over me in this pool of blood. And no one gave me any help. And by the grace of God, I was able to get myself up and travel to a place where people were going to the Street Voices meeting. I actually had been going to Street Voices prior to that incident. That was the second incident that made me realize that I needed to get out of the streets or I was going to die. Fortunately, these people knew me from Street Voices, and they brought me to people like Tyra here, who helped me not only with the physical things that were going on from the robbery, but with the psychological things. I was able to work very hard and get myself out of homelessness. Took me about 18 months from that point. And I was stable for 5 years until September of this past year. New owner bought my building, and they said they needed to do the electrical wiring in my building. So they asked me to leave. They said all the residents had to leave, but it turned out that that wasn't the truth. It's out of 10 units, 4 people stayed there. For whatever reason, they asked me to move out. I don't know, but back into this situation again. And fortunately, I have Street Voices and other resources that I've learned through Street Voices. Like Tyra just mentioned, we're going on our 7th year, and I've been participating pretty much since the beginning. I haven't always been able to attend the meetings due to the fact that I was working to keep myself out of homelessness. I had a very rough night last night. I stayed in the shelter not very far away from here called Higher Grounds. It's also ran by Catholic Charities, and they have some type of infestation. They have some type of bed bug or lice or something that's in there. And 2 nights in a row, this creature attacked me. So didn't really get much sleep last night due to that fact. I had a lot of stuff that I wanted to speak to you all about, including that. One of the things that is important to me is individuality, making sure that people recognize the people who are in homeless situations as individuals. It seems that most cases, people who are homeless get pulled into one class or several negative classes. Like, for instance, they say these people are homeless because they're criminals or drug addicts. And that's not always the case. Sometimes people can be homeless fleeing domestics, sort of like my situation, or they could have lost their job and lost their home, or maybe the Christmas tree caught on fire and burnt down their house. It's all different types of reasons that people can become homeless. And right now, what I'm seeing in the shelter, living in the shelter, is a lot of people from the LGBTQ community coming there, and they're most likely being rejected housing because of this, and their families are maybe even putting them out, you know, because of their sexuality. And I don't think there's enough attention to the individuality in situations like this. You know, I don't think people are seeing that homeless people are all different types of people, not just a negative group. So I'm as a person that's been discriminated pretty much all of my life, I can relate to these different situations, and I would like to try and express this to you all so you all can see that that there's a need for compassion, and there's a need to help people, all people, because we are all the human race. We're not just black and white or purple and green. We are the human race, and regardless of someone's sexual preferences or their religion or something like that, we all should be able to accept them and help them so we can change the situation. And like I said, I had prepared something to say to you all, but my emotions have completely taken over and changed what I wanted to say to you all. But I really, really would like you all to look at individuality when you look at homeless people. And if you are trying to help them, try to help their personal situation. You know, that's pretty much all I can say right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecil. Yeah, as he stated, there's a lot of reasons people can be homeless. Tornado, hurricane, divorce, somebody got a sick, funeral, one paycheck away from the street. I did talk about the shelter task force. We also have participated in additional coalitions and initiatives like the Envision Community Board of Directors, Shelter Efficiency Meetings, and the Heading Home Hennepin Executive Committee. We also do work with the Office to End Homeless, David Hewitt. We've hosted forums, Mariel forums. That's when Jacob Fry was running, but I won't go into that, but okay. Let's see. Oh, DID, the downtown district. You know, we call them the green guys that clean up stuff and greet community. We collaborated with them to get storage space for folks, especially that are staying in encampments and they don't have anywhere to put their most important documents or their most valued sentimental things. And we did a press conference with the mayor to get that going, and the Minnesota Department of Transportation to host it in their parking ramp. And my personal story of homelessness, I've been in shelter, couch hopped. I stayed in an abandoned home in North Minneapolis, no water, electricity. Yeah, hard times. But I'm currently now formally homeless, and my experience out there, I made a lot of friends, and a lot of folks that are not here today who died homeless. Some just getting in their door and they've been waiting for that surgery and got into their apartment, but it was a little too late. They died because some doctors are just refusing to do surgeries if it's not deemed life-threatening, because they know they're going to go back to a shelter that cannot provide adequate aftercare. So we've lost a lot of people along the way. When I got into my housing, I could not forget how traumatizing that was, and that if I ever get homeless again, I don't want to be treated like that. Ever. I don't want to see anybody else get treated like that. We lost people in the winter time. As I was saying to one of your colleagues here, it's so doable. 20,000 people, one of the richest states in the country. How can we not lead the example on how to get to a functioning zero? That means it's rare, it's brief, and non-reoccurring. Got hundreds and thousands of folks in New York. We see the news, 100,000 folks out in California. We have 20,000, and we're sitting on $20 billion surplus. It's so doable. They could buy every one of them a house, and you wouldn't even feel it in your budget. You wouldn't even miss it. It's just so doable. So I thank you for letting us speak today, and willing to take any questions. I don't know, hands. Oh, sure, yeah.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you, Tyra, and thank you, Cecil. The question I have is, could you talk a little bit more about the, and I might not say the term right, the homeless bill of rights that you talked about, because I think it's important to know, like, what are some of the components in there? What did you come up with? And that's what you said, I think, was passed by the legislature. Is that correct?
It wasn't passed. What they gave us was an opportunity to go out and talk to community, conversation with providers who provide shelter, and the Shelter Bill of Rights was put together based on all of our concerns: quality of food, choice of food. I don't eat pork, but I might not be able to eat that night because that's what's on the table, right? Cleanliness, grievance process. Let's see what else. We put this together and it ended up in the contracts now. It's actually it's in the sleeve of a contract. When shelters come back now to get more money from county, there's this sheet in there that says that, are you going to abide by these guidelines based on the Shelter Bill of Rights, Street Voices to Change? So now that is setting a standard. It looks different from when we did it because we had to learn that legislation, the verbiage has to be right. It's all the I's and T's crossed. But the goal is to set a standard. We did get pushback from providers about that, because they were thinking, well, are we going to get penalized if we don't follow these rules? Are we going to have to be required to be licensed? And I feel, yeah, you're over vulnerable adults. When you're homeless, whether you have a disability or not, you are in a vulnerable space. You don't have a door. You don't have a lock or a key or, the elements of outside. So if you're going to take in these vulnerable adults, there should be a certain degree of oversight. It's really sad that for nursing homes, we were the last states to require a license for a nursing home. I couldn't believe it. 20,000 complaints later.
Like I said earlier, I escaped homelessness for 5 years, and in the time that I escaped, they made a lot of changes to the shelters. They were really, really bad. As far as for hygiene, they didn't have anything maybe but razor blades and toothbrushes and just small amounts of soap. They didn't have soap in the shower areas, and the shower areas were really disgusting. I can't even just describe the filth that was there. And then they would do things like they would turn off the water all the way off, so you could not use the restroom, you could not take a shower. People defecating outside, and it just was a really bad situation in some of these places. And due to the Shelter Residence Bill of Rights, a lot of these things have changed. I've visited because I had to stay there, some of these shelters, and seen some of the changes that have been made, and they made them a little bit more breathable. Yet there's one shelter on my list that is just it's always going to be terrible. Even though they changed some of these things, I'm not going to name them. I don't want to. I don't want to put them in a spot like that. But they, even though they changed some of these things to kind of accommodate the Shelter Residents Bill of Rights, they started doing different things. Like now they don't turn the water all the way off; they just turn the hot water off, so people won't take long showers because they're cold. You know, they still have not really done a great job with cleaning out the shower areas and different things like that. They made the sleeping space a little bit more breathable, and they also did things like now they make people put their shoes in plastic bags so people don't have to smell people with bad hygiene. They don't have to smell their shoes, and then if there is a person with very bad hygiene and they're stinking or something like that, they give them the option of either getting in the shower or leaving the shelter. For the shelter that I'm staying in currently, I am going to make a big deal about the bed bugs or lice or whatever creature is in there eating me. I'm pretty sure it's eating other people. So I'm going to make a big deal about that, because that is something that should have been addressed with the Shelter Residents Bill of Rights. Yet this place that I am in, I've seen it change an awful lot. They didn't have places for you to store your clothes, like a locker. You have to bring your own lock, but now they have a locker for you to put your stuff in. And they also had a smoking room in there, which they converted into a laundry room. So now you can do your laundry there at least one time a week, according to whatever your last name is. They go alphabetically. And so you have a day that your letter pops up on and you can wash your clothes in there. They are responsible for doing all of the linen in there. So they do that on a regular basis. So, oh yeah, sorry about that.
Could I ask, we've got another guest here, and I'd like to talk about collaboration, because there are some good work being done by organizations like Beacon, Vivo, Catholic Charities that are really understanding it. I think something like you're trying to describe the situation. And Katie is here and commenting. Talk about collaboration, if you would, for a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, everybody, for having us here. My name is Katie. I work for an organization called Align Minneapolis. We are an interfaith coalition. We have 17 member congregations here across Minneapolis, as well as people with lived experience. So our organization supports Street Voices of Change, and kind of speaking to collaboration. Really, we see foundationally to understanding how to address homelessness. We need to hear from people who have experiences and lived experiences of homelessness. So that's one of the reasons that we are partnered with Street Voices of Change, because we can't do the work to end homelessness without these folks. You've heard just a couple of folks from Street Voices today, and just the amount of wisdom that they hold. So you can imagine, across the 45, 50, 60 people that we meet with every week, there's just an incredible amount of wisdom. So I don't know if I had to step out, I apologize, but I don't know if you mentioned that Street Voices meets twice a week, or they're hosted in 2 of our member congregations. And so our member congregations are really helping to support making sure those meetings happen, making sure that it's a safe space for people, that they can come truly as they are, and that they're empowered to work for change in that space. And then we also have a couple of members of Street Voices of Change who are part of our steering committee, sort of like a board of directors, so that as an organization, we're really understanding kind of at a big picture when we talk about our strategic direction and our vision and who we are, that we have those voices at the table. So it absolutely is collaboration. It absolutely is partnership. And we could not do this work if we did not have people with lived experience at the table. So I just want to say shout out to all, to Tyra, to Cecil, to all Street Voices of Change. They just do incredible work, and teach me every day. So.
Thank you. That is important about having lived experience at every table. If you're talking about ending homelessness, lived experience at every decision-making table, all the way to Washington and back. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Too late. You understand what I'm saying, right? You know, Irish is so bad to me today. In honor of you speaking today, we ask you to sign this book that we donate to the Way to Grow, the third grader in the school in Minneapolis area, to be more successful in life or school. We will give you the book, you to sign to the children's third grade, I said already. So thank you very much for today's speech. And here is a brochure of our club. Anytime you want to join us, or join the club, or attend the meeting, please welcome. Sign this book. Yeah.
Right.
Did you want to hear both of them?
Might I add why we're signing this, just so you get where we're at with the housing support bill? Governor Walz signed off on that bill, and now folks only have to pay 30% when they stay in that housing program.
That's right.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Tyrus. Thank you, Cecil. Thanks, Tom. Want to also thank our volunteers for today, our greeter, Russ Mickelitz, reflection from Mary Pat Cumming, our vacational from Sandy Christensen, our day chair, Tom Tamara again, Zoom masters, Brock and Greg. Obviously, we've had some audio issues today, so we'll work through that. But our club administrators, Dick and Steve, and welcome Dave Kramhelwich for joining us today and in the future. So thank you to our guests for joining us today. So welcome to have you. And June 7th, so that's next week, we have vocational roundtables. It will be a rousing discussion on artificial intelligence. So it's everywhere right now. Come in and we'll have a great discussion about that. The 14th, again, reminder, we are not meeting in this room on the 14th. We'll be on a boat. So please join us, register. And with that, I have a few weeks left before I turn it over to Jean, who's in Australia right now. But with that, go out and have a wonderful Rotary week.